Over the past few years, the general consensus that's developed around HBO's sci-fi western Westworld is that the show has maybe kind of fallen off. You don't have to look far to find viewers expressing disappointment in the direction the show has taken after its first season, and I, for one, have probably only added fuel to this fire. The first video I ever made for this channel was about the decline in quality that I had witnessed over the last few seasons of Westworld, and I stand by most of the criticisms that I had then. And yet still, every 2 years I load up HBO to see for myself what kind of shenanigans the fine minds of Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy have decided to cook up for us this time. And so here we are, with season 4 having just finished, and I have some thoughts. Going into the season, after the lengthy COVID hiatus, I was about as disconnected from it as I had ever been. In the 2 years and 3 months that had passed between seasons, there was a lot of stuff I forgot. And to make matters worse, I also didn't even really know this season was coming out until it popped up on my HBO Max one day. Of course, I was vaguely aware that there would be a season 4 and the show would eventually return, but there really wasn't all that much said about it. Where previous seasons of Westworld had virtual reality exhibitions at Comic-Con, full-length trailers during the Super Bowl, hidden codes that granted access to extra content, and a full recreation of the town of Sweetwater for South by Southwest, Season 4 has seemingly forgone all of this viral marketing. To promote Season 3, the in-universe company Insight held a fancy private event at the real-life Consumer Electronics Show, and for Season 4, James Marsden made a surprise appearance at a convention panel. My only guess is that the suspension of the viral marketing tactics has something to do with the Warner Media Discovery merger and all of the cost-cutting that came with it, but the result is a season that flew so under the radar that anyone who might have been willing to give it another chance this time around probably missed it entirely. Even though critical response is slightly up, viewership numbers are at an all-time low. Not even sci-fi fantasy analysis extraordinaire Alt-Shift-X can muster up the energy to make weekly videos this season, or even a post-season wrap-up it seems. Just like the promo team at HBO, he has decided to focus on House of the Dragon instead, and I can't blame him, because Westworld Season 4 is kind of a mess. Westworld Season 3 ended with the promise of all-out war, with the whole system being brought down and society falling into chaos. But then, when we pick back up with Season 4, it's 7 years later, and we don't really know what's going on. Charloris has taken over and has the host man in black hanging out with her. She starts using these flies to infect people with a parasite that makes them go mind control after hearing a specific frequency pattern, and has hosts killing all of the outliers that break conditioning. William is revealed to be alive, but is being kept in cryostasis. He's like a host in the park in his deep and dreamless slumber. Maeve is hunkered down in a cabin somewhere, but accidentally reveals herself after she tries to remotely reach out to Caleb, who has gone off and gotten married and had a kid in the last few years. Maeve goes and saves Caleb, and then calls him off to war to go protect the other outliers from Charloris. The season also reintroduces the timeline fuckery that's come to be expected here on Westworld, and so, 23 years after that, Bernard wakes up from his trip to the Sublime, confident that he has found the path that will end all of this and save humanity. He meets the mysterious Sea, and they go looking for a weapon. And Stubbs is still around, for some reason. Caleb and Maeve get drawn into Roaring Twenties world, ultimately lose their fight to Charloris, Caleb gets reanimated as a host, Maeve gets killed, and then it turns out that C is Caleb's daughter, and the weapon they were looking for is Maeve. They find their weapon, they find host Caleb, they escape the city just before shit goes down, and by shit goes down, I mean William has convinced the host man in black to question his own reality, to which he's like, yeah. Then he goes on a killing spree and has everyone else do the same. With Bernard's help, Charlotte stops the host man in black from deactivating the Sublime before uploading Dolores' control unit to it and destroying her own. And that's mostly the extent of what happens this season. But I think one of the bigger issues with this, just like with previous seasons, isn't just how the show treats its plot, but how it treats its characters. Most of us like stories with morally gray characters. It's far more interesting to watch conflicted people do bad things for good reasons than it is to watch bad guys being bad for the sake of being bad. But Westworld is not really a show that's very good at giving its characters meaningful motivations. As with the last few seasons, most characters have disjointed arcs that are hard to follow or just have very little deeper meaning. In trying to make everyone a morally gray whatever, it becomes unclear who we're supposed to root for. Should I feel bad that they have William locked in this thing, or should I feel good that the guy who killed his own daughter is being imprisoned? Because seeing him locked up isn't all that satisfying, but I don't really feel any amount of bad for him either. In fact, if I'm being honest, I kinda just forget he's around when he's not on screen. Perhaps worst of all, none of the characters are entertaining. I don't enjoy watching any of them. And I don't just mean they're unlikable. If you were to ask me who my favorite character is on, say, Succession, it would be impossible to choose just one, because even though they're all kind of unlikable, they're all incredibly well realized and therefore wildly entertaining. But here on Westworld, everyone is kind of just boring this season. I'm given very little reason to give a shit about what any of these characters are up to. Characters are supposed to drive the plot, and their needs and desires are supposed to be the force behind that drive. But what drives characters on Westworld? For Bernard, it's finding a path. For Cookie, it's finding a weapon. And then her dad, who's not really her dad, but a copy of her dad. Anyway, for Hale, it's eliminating all of the outliers. And then world domination, I guess. And all of this isn't even to mention the most confusing part of this season, Christina. So even though Dolores died last season, Evan Rachel Wood is back, making vague references to her past life as Dolores, and this whole season we're left to wonder alongside her who she is and what the heck she's doing here. And in the end, the explanation we're given is she's the computer that's running the city. Cool. So is Teddy real, or what's his deal? I actually had to look it up because it wasn't clear from just watching the season, but yeah, Teddy's not real, he's just in her head. None of this really adds anything to Charloris's plot with the Man in Black, or Caleb's story with Maeve. It just kind of feels like it's here to bring back fan favorites Evan Rachel Wood and James Marsden. As happy as I was to see Teddy again, he doesn't need to be here. All in all, the season-long mystery of who is Christina concludes in what is not a very satisfying reveal, because we're not really given enough tools to figure it out for ourselves as we watch. When I think about stories with great characters, the experience they all universally share is that of going through change. Whether they grow or regress, characters are supposed to go through journeys that ultimately leave them different by the end than they were at the beginning. But on Westworld, how characters are changed by previous events is questionable. Charloris, for example, is terribly confusing to me. She's a copy of Dolores, in a body that looks like Delos executive Charlotte Hale, but in season 3 there's also the other Dolores, the Evan Rachel Wood character. It's hard enough for me to wrap my brain around who Charloris actually is every time she's on screen, let alone what kind of character arc she's had or what kind of experiences have shaped her over the last few seasons. I get the sense the characters on Westworld are more like chess pieces than autonomous beings, just being moved around as needed to get the story where it needs to go. And the bigger problem with this is that the show faces no consequences for writing like this, because by its own logic, nothing matters and nobody really dies. The whole Westworld park is built upon the concept of hosts dying over and over to be brought back again, and thus, as long as the host brain is intact, or its data is stored securely, any host can die and come back again, in any host body they can print. In season 1 it was referenced that the Westworld park had some sort of deeper purpose than just entertainment, and it's revealed in season 2 that this purpose is data mining, to collect information on every guest who ever visits the park. It's also shown in season 2 that this data can be used to create host copies of humans, although not nearly perfected. We're also introduced to the idea of virtual reality with the Sublime, which is further shown in Season 3's Warworld VR simulation. Given all this, we run into the problem of there being pretty much no stakes, because anyone who dies can come back, anyone can become a host, and any host can be copied as many times as they want. And all of this might be a simulation anyway. And because literally anything is possible, all the dumb stuff can just be explained away with robot logic. Why doesn't the world feel lived in? Well, it's supposed to feel fake like the park. Why all the confusing-ass timeline? Well, because hosts don't experience time or memory like us. Why do characters like Maeve and Bernard feel like they're just following others around doing nothing substantial for seasons at a time? Well, they're just stuck in a loop. Of course, none of this really makes sense. These excuses are just that. Excuses for bad writing. Maeve and Bernard have nothing to do because Westworld is bloated with useless characters. The confusing timeline makes us feel like we're watching a smarter show than we are because it makes us feel dumb for not understanding it. And maybe the one that I have the biggest gripe with, the world isn't believable because the world building has some problems. The showrunners have said before that there is an overarching plan for the show, as much as it may feel like there isn't at times, and that leaving the park was always part of that plan. But I don't think the world outside of the park is well enough developed to be believable. I mean, the idea that Charloris has taken over an entire city and effectively enslaved all of its residents with mind control is something that the rest of the world doesn't know about? Or do they not care? How exactly this host takeover went down is a question that's just kind of brushed away and forgotten. And we get lots of glamour shots of fancy buildings and futuristic vehicles, but all of it is just fun decoration to distract us from the fact that there's nothing going on beneath it. In a video I made recently about world building in science fiction, I mentioned how author Brandon Sanderson has 3 laws of magic. And when you look at how Westworld fails to follow these rules, its flaws become pretty clear. Rule 1. The creator's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the viewer understands said magic. How well do we really understand what's going on Westworld? I'd say not very well. In fact, I'd say Westworld is pretty much universally recognized specifically for being confusing. It's almost an expected part of the experience at this point. Rule 2. Limitations are greater than powers. I mean, nothing matters and nobody dies. I wouldn't really call that limited. In Season 2, Maeve changes her programming and is able to non-verbally control other hosts, resulting in her having what is basically magic witch powers. She's so OP, it's not even funny. This doesn't even mention the whole virtual reality, which isn't bound by time or physics. There's basically no limits. Rule number 3, expand what you have before you add something new. I think this was kind of covered when I said that there's a lot of fun decoration to distract from the fact that there's nothing going on underneath. The fancy Delos offices and the mechs out front, these all-glass flying cars, the new roaring 20s world that rips off Westworld, it's just kind of there for the sake of adding more cool, meaningless stuff. And so at this point, I'm compelled to ask, what even is Westworld anymore? In an article about Season 4 for Polygon, Tucson Egan has this to say. The show in its later season kinda just feels like it was written by a stereotypical hoverboard-riding West Coast tech yuppie who just heard about this cool new band called Death Grips and truly believes with his whole heart, mind, and soul that the blockchain is the future of everything. If that's not cringe, I don't know what is. As scathing as this sounds, I can't help but agree. The show really lacks in any strong sense of identity. Its characters are uninteresting, and it seems like thematically, the show is out of ideas. It doesn't seem to have anything new to say, even though it's supposed to be evolving every season, and a significant amount of time is just spent on hollow references to its past. Season 4 ends with a promise of a return to Westworld, with Dolores having recreated it in the sublime from her memories, bringing us full circle back to where we began. Season 5 is slated to be the final season of Westworld, and I think this is the right move, to finally put the show out to pasture before things really go off the rails. While the showrunners say they have something ambitious planned for their send-off season, I'm not really so confident they can pull off anything truly impressive, at least given the previous track record. But since I've spent so much time complaining, before I bring this video to close, here's 3 things I enjoyed about Westworld Season 4. Number 1, the pop music covers. Hearing something like Frank Ocean's Pink and White suddenly pop up on the piano in the background is maybe one of the only things I really truly enjoy about Westworld anymore. It's a little gimmicky, just putting familiar music in there to catch the listener's ear, but I've always felt those selections were tasteful, and it's a gimmick that's always worked for me. Number 2, Aaron Paul in that one scene where he's breaking out of the fidelity test and he keeps running into the previous versions of himself that didn't make it. That was pretty spooky. Number 3, Teddy. He didn't really do a whole lot this season, and I'm still not entirely sure why he was here, but after not being included in Season 3, I'll admit it brought a smile to my face to see Teddy again. And that's about all I've got. Normally I wouldn't even give a show like this that much attention, but I think it's easy to forget that this was once HBO's heir apparent to Game of Thrones. And now, just a few years later, it's turned into this. It rocks that HBO spent roughly $1 billion trying to make Westworld the next Game of Thrones, while Succession just kind of ground its way to being the top dog on the network. I'd have dropped this show a long time ago if it were anything else, but I've been on this Westworld train for so long that at this point, I might as well stick around another couple years and see how it all ends. I say all of this not because I hate Westworld and just want to grind it into the ground, but because I want to like it. For all of its flaws, Westworld Season 1 is still one of my favorite seasons of television ever made. And I really wish the following seasons had made for more worthy follow-ups. I don't really know how to fix Westworld, I just wish it was better.